Welcome to Something to Talk About. This is the Bainbridge Island Senior Community Center's regular program, which today is focused on our first kickoff discussion about Stamped, the book that we are reading as a community as Bainbridge Island Reads for Justice. Our programs, all of them about a variety of topics, are sponsored by Fieldstone Communities of Bainbridge Island. They offer innovative and compassionate care. They are located up on Rolling Bay, and they also have day stay and respite programs. To learn more or to schedule a tour, call 360-689-4314. Also, as we often do, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Suquamish tribe, our neighbors who are wonderfully hospitable, and we honor them and appreciate that hospitality. Ann Lovejoy is our coordinator for these conversations about Stamped. We are specifically talking about the young adult version of the book, but it comes in several flavors. It comes in the original by Ibram Kendi, and which is called Stamped from the Beginning. And there's also a Stamped for Kids, so you can. Oh, and also I learned today there's a version of the Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism and You, which is the mixed version that was co-written with Jason Reynolds. There's a version in Spanish, so you can practice your Spanish as you read the book. Thanks, Ann, for helping out with this.
Oh, you bet, Reed. Thank you. And I would like to tell people, maybe you'd like to tell people that we have, the Senior Center bought 100 books and gave, I believe, half of them to the library to give out for book clubs. So some are available at the library, but ours are, we also have, I believe, and you can fill me in on this, Reed, that we have some actual books as well as some audio books. Is that correct?
So yeah, so we have several books that you can come by and just pick up at the front, one per customer, and they've got our name on them, and you can read through them. They are the young adult version. And then there are about 18 audio versions available through Libro FM. And I think that probably the best thing to do if you are interested in that would be to contact me, because what I will do is send a link that you then would activate, and you would just activate one of them if you want the audio book free as a gift. And you have to get the app. You have to download the app on your device, and then you can listen to the audio book. So it's not without some encumbrances, but it is a free audiobook. So there you go.
There's also, if you use the Libby app at the library, which any of the reference librarians can help you put on your phone or your Kindle or whatever you want, you can borrow the audiobook from the library. And the Jason Reynolds reads his own book. He's extremely personable. He is a YA, young adult author who is extremely readable and accessible and funny, wry, smart and quick. And listening to him read his own book is a real treat. If you,
yeah, it might actually be in some ways more accessible. Mostly reading, not young adult books. This book has a lot of sort of tangents and things flying in from all angles that caught me a little unawares. It seemed a little irreverent, shall I say?
Well, he said in an interview, which maybe we can watch after a little bit, there's a very brief interview with Trevor Noah and the two authors, Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. And he talks about how he had to compete for children's attention or young people's attention with all kinds of devices and online stuff and apps and this and that, right? And video games. And so he deliberately created a way of writing that kind of reflects or captures that sort of quick, relatively short attention span and lively kind of conversation. And I think he does that really well. I read a lot of young adult books because I'm always really interested in what younger readers are absorbing and taking in. And if you go to the library, you can ask for the teen librarians to put together like a book bundle for you of young adult books written by people of color, for instance, or whatever. And you'll find some astonishing, fascinating, wonderful, rich things. So that's a great way to kind of get yourself more into this young adult mindset, I guess.
Yeah, the other thing I might mention is that I think that one of the reasons this was suggested as the first Bainbridge Island Community Reads for Justice book was because it is among a number of books that are in the curriculum at our schools. And I think it was mentioned at one of the outreaches about the district improvement plan that this was a book, and somebody at the meeting said, well, can we read these books? Of course you can read these books. So now we're looking at one of them. And that, by the way, there's a video that went up last week. We had a conversation a week ago with a couple of school board members about that district improvement plan and some of those other books. And if you are interested in learning about that, you can go to the youtube.com/BI Senior Center and see our channel there.
Another really great point about this book being a young adult book is that it makes it great for multi-generational reads. If you have grandkids, or you and your kids and your grandkids, or whatever, neighbor kids, you want to read it and talk with together, this is a great book that really is accessible for different age levels. And I think that's not always the case with the kind of books that we might want to read. And I think that's part of why this one was chosen. I don't know if you all know that this was Blair King, our city manager's choice, that he had done a book group like this in Coronado, California before, and felt it was really rewarding and wanted us to be able to have that same kind of shared experience as an island, all island read, right? So I'm curious to hear from all of you. We're looking for some ideas and information and advice, I guess, about ways we can structure these specific book groups for Stamped that we're going to be offering 2 in January, 2 in February, possibly some more in March. We'd like to do hybrids because I think they're very accessible. We'll do the kind of format we've done before, where we have some people sitting around a table at the senior center and other people on the big screen zooming in, so that if you can't make it to the meeting, you could at least share that way, and have a moderator making sure that everybody gets heard and stuff. But I'm curious about a couple things. Yeah, there's the meeting room and there's somebody in it apparently. So here we are, hybridizing. Right? But we want to offer a chance to explore the ideas that inform Stamped. And we want people to feel like they can ask questions freely but safely. And I'm curious about what you all think about, for instance, should we have time limits for each person who speaks? I see a few heads nodding. Barbara, would you like to speak to that a little bit?
I think time limits are helpful because I've experienced in a lot of group conversations that some people are not aware of how much time they are taking. And so I think an external reminder is a great thing, because we want everybody who has something to say to be able to say it.
Yeah.
Rita, did you want to chime in on that?
Yep. Yes, I agree with that we should have some kind of a time limit, and maybe we can even have like a big digital, like a clock thing or a thing that you just hit so it can be easily seen. So we don't have to be going, your time is up, but something like that, because it can get carried away. Because I sometimes get carried away.
I happen to have a bag full of little sand timers because of our old peace cafes and some of the conversation cafes we had in the past, where it had been a little bit of an issue. And having a timekeeper. On Monday, we were at the library where they had one of the introductory programs about Stamped, this book. And Glynis, you were the timekeeper for that, right? And
for I think our group, 6 people.
Having somebody kind of be a designated timekeeper can be helpful, because then, it's not personal. It's right.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a little? I'm on the road, so I'm trying to maneuver. But hello, family. How's everybody doing today?
Hey.
Yeah, it's great to see everybody this wonderful Monday morning. But I just wanted to say it's a wonderful way that we remind people. Our young people, they do a musical chime. So if you hear the musical chime, you know it's, if you do a musical chime, then you know it's time. And so that's a wonderful way to not, like, people are, pressed or anything by the time, the little clock ticking down, and they get all anxious because they know their time is running out, but allow them freely to speak. But when they hear the musical chime, they know it's time. And so I think it's a wonderful way for us to send the reminder that our time is kind of up and we've exhausted, but this is good that we're having the conversation, because we don't want other voices to dominate. We want others to feel welcome to come in, and if they decide they want to pass, that's okay too. But this is good, we're having the conversation.
Yeah, I think setting up some structure is really helpful, because you're right. A lot of times, many people have many ideas and are very full of energy, and I'm one of those people, and don't always share the air as well as we might. And so having a share the air like set up at the beginning is probably a good way to start. I also kind of wanted to talk a little about how sometimes you might feel, any of us might feel, that a conversation could be kind of strewn with landscapes, and we don't want to make a mistake, or we don't want to say something terrible or wrong or ignorant or whatever. And so trying to create a what I call a no blame, no shame culture, that, some of the best teachers I ever had would say things like, there are no stupid questions, there are no wrong questions. If you have a question, it's a good one, bring it forward. And making sure that we hold that together. Again, I see some heads nodding a little bit here, but so any ideas about how we can go about that well? Is it enough to just say those things up front? Or do we need to have little reminders now and then?
I think that chime idea sounds nice, like a little a little bell. I don't know. I have something that you hit with a little mallet, and it's called harmony. It's like a little bar, and boing, it sounds so good. I don't know where it is at the moment, but it really is a nice sound.
I have one of those too. But I'm thinking again about like making a safe conversation, making a safe space for conversation. Has anybody been in groups where they felt like that worked really well or didn't work?
I just have something back on the time. When we were
Sure.
doing the forums before the election for the League of Women Voters, and people had specific times, we were able to have a clock up in the upper corner. And usually they had 3 minutes. And then when it went down to 1 minute, it would switch a color. It would be a countdown. And then when they had 30 seconds left, it would switch to red. And it worked very well. So people weren't interrupting, but everybody could see what the times were.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing I wanted to say was I was there on Monday, and it was billed as a conversation, but with the time, there was no real way to converse. You couldn't say, explain that, or why did you say that? And finally I interrupted somebody and said, where was this happening? Because she had never told us where in terms of the United States this experience was happening. So I think we've got to understand how people can participate as well as not have people totally take it over.
That is a really good question or point to make, Delight, because it's exactly right that I and several other people felt like Monday was not a conversation precisely because it was so carefully structured. And I think the structure was intended to make people feel safe, but how, in some of the conversation cafes I've participated in before, we've pretty much gone around small groups, maybe 6 people at a table at the most, so that there's time for everybody to chime in. And when groups get as big as this, we would split off probably into 2 or possibly 3 groups, so that everybody did get a chance to share. Is there feeling about that, do you think, or size? Does the size matter, George?
We did that a lot when we had to Zoom school during COVID. So we would break into smaller groups. Everybody had a chance to listen and speak. And then when we came back together, we could share sort of the primary things of each group. And I think everybody, especially because we wanted to do it because of the kids, but everybody got a chance to be heard.
Well,
And-
Zoom certainly allows for that.
Mhm.
Yeah, we can break off into what do you call them? Clusters, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conversation groups and, the Zoom they have their breakout rooms and,
That's what it
you know,
is.
I think it's a doable thing. I think that, when we say that we want, I mean, the goal is, I think we always start with a goal. It's a goal for us to unify, come together, to connect, to build the relationships, to have these meaningful conversations. I believe that the intent will help us to shape how we will move forward to do the work. And if the goal is for BI Reads to have multiple diverse communities coming to the table to have these conversations around the issues, if we have to set the table for inclusive engagement, we've got to set the table. What do you want that table to look like as we move forward to do the work? Because that will determine what, not just what's on the table, but it'll determine how people will be able to come in and fellowship at that table. Because I think the fellowship is around this serious issue is what we want to be able to be really earnest and transparent and be able to just share our own lived in experience. So I think just having this conversation of what it might look like is so helpful in the process of what we would like to, what outcomes would we like from this?
Exactly. Thank you. Because that's why we're doing this, really. It's like, we've done many book groups, we have different kinds, but I think this is a little different in that it's a topic that many people might find that they feel a little vulnerable around talking about. And that's great. I mean, that is important. And Blair.
Thank you. I guess I agree with everything, and I particularly liked your last comment, Karen. But I'm concerned that at least my experience in our group, and I thought the groups were fascinating just because it was such a diverse group of perspectives and ways of hearing those perspectives, but it was in no way a conversation. It was, at least within our group, we were each listening to one person speak, and then we moved on to the next. And I think Delight's point about not being able to follow it up, it just wasn't a conversation. It was individual recitals, at least as we did it. And I think the timing and I thought the questions were good, and they definitely opened it for all of us to speak, but I didn't see it as a conversation where I learned anything more about the individual or their perspective than their short 1 minute or whatever it was, 2 minutes, I guess,
Yeah.
time opportunity to share the story they wanted to share.
I think Rita and then Sheila.
I was thinking the same thing. It's hard sometimes, when you have a lot of people, but I was wondering if maybe on some of these, maybe not all, that there would be like one specific question or point that we might want to talk about to kind of, and maybe not every time, but maybe on a couple of them, at least to start with, so that we have a starting point, because this is such a broad subject and there's so many different things that you could just get confused. So I'm just thinking of targeting maybe, or at least a couple times, a specific question or idea. That's my thought.
No, that's great. And I have to come up with some questions, but I would love if any of you think of good opening questions or questions you would find helpful. If you could put them in the chat, that would be great. Sheila and then Reed.
Yeah, I would agree so totally with what Ann was saying. I was frustrated because there were 3 other people in that group that I had never met before, and I wanted to know more about where they were coming from. And everybody in the group was fascinating. And I missed out on that. I thought the questions were good. and opened it up, but it didn't carry on for a conversation like Ann was saying.
Reed?
I'm wondering about, there are a couple ways I think seems like we might go about doing this. We could look at, say, a section. The book is divided up into sections. So we could look at a section or two so that we could agree, oh, we're going to talk about these pages, ideas that come up in these pages for each of the period. Or we could task ourselves with coming up with themes or topics and go through that. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts about themes versus sort of the chronological way of organizing it.
Anne?
Unmute myself. I think that's a great idea, Reed. And my recommendation, particularly with this book, or at least preference, I think, until I hear other ideas, would be to do it section by section, because I think sometimes it's
Right.
tricky to do a theme, because that encompasses such a big thing that it doesn't give you a chance to sort of do what the author has very clearly and intentionally done in this case, which is to guide you through the conversation with him.
So one thing I thought was interesting is that Jason Reynolds says, I wrote this for Black kids. And I'm curious if anybody feels like that makes it more relevant or less relevant to them. George?
I didn't realize he'd made that statement, so I thought he wrote it for me.
I love that. He did write it for you.
I think, and this is Akuye, I think he wrote it so that we can be able to engage. I think he wrote it so that we can really look at how do we address these issues and how do we break down these barriers. And I know that I feel like he wrote it for humanity to be able to say, but he was very intentional about the messages he wanted to communicate to young Black students or young people or community or members of a community. But I believe that he has written that in the intent that we will look at how we've done things in the past and the harms that they have caused, and what would be our minds and our perspectives as we move forward to challenge some of our history. And so that's my feeling on it. And I don't believe that there's one or correct way of engaging. That we are all learning as we enter into spaces to do this work. And so as we do move forward, that we move forward with grace and mercy for our creating a learning community, because that's what I feel it is. We are creating a learning community that can look at these things and be able to engage in healthy conversations about them.
Yes, exactly. I'm wondering, Reed, if we have a little short video, I think it's 5 minutes, with it's an interview with Trevor Noah, with the two authors, with Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi. And I just found it so, what a great introduction to the book. So let's look at that together.
Which a lot of people welcome, gentlemen, to the Daily Show.
Thank you, thank you.
Great to see you again, but let's jump into this book, which a lot of people would see the cover and go like, why would I read this? Racism, anti-racism, and you. The first thing you say is, this is not a history book. What does that mean?
Look, I chose to start the book that way because this book is geared toward younger people, and younger people don't like to read history books.
Right.
And so you start off by saying, don't worry, this is not a history book, and then you okey-doke them, right? And the other part of it, though, is that we talk about history as if it's in a bubble. But the truth is that history is perennial. It runs through our lives every single day, and it's more about it being a present book that history actually impacts.
That's really interesting, because that has been fascinating reading through this. I didn't know what to expect. You know, you read books that tell you about the history of America. You read books that only focus on racism today, or maybe even Jim Crow. But this book really just takes you through everything in a way that seems like it's palatable. Like, has it been designed in such a way that you can just read it and understand without feeling too much? Is that what you've tried to do for younger readers?
I mean, racism is historical. And what that means is it's rooted in the past, but you can constantly see it operating in
Right.
your daily life, and you can constantly see how it's going to operate tomorrow. And that's what we wanted to sort of show for young people, that this history book is in the present. It's operating in the future, so they can understand their everyday lives.
When you wrote the book, you know, the two of you came together, Jason and Ibram, and you worked on this, telling this story of racism, and you have such short chapters in the book, which is really interesting. It doesn't follow the formats of a normal book. Sometimes a chapter is 10 pages, sometimes it's longer. Sometimes the way you write on a page, like the words pop out, they change. It really does engage you in a certain way. Were you trying to break the mind and how it's consuming information when you created the book?
For sure, but I'm also trying to make sure that we're working with the realities of young folks, which is an overstimulated world, right? I can't compete with cell phones, video games, YouTube, Fortnite, and all these things that they
Yes.
have going on with their lives every single day. My job isn't to compete, though. That's a silly and futile argument. My job is to work with those things by creating multiple stimuli within the pages of a book. Why not?
Why? That's brilliant. I think without even realizing it, you might have hit on another opportunity. You just add like an expansion onto Fortnite that just teaches you about racism.
Exactly.
So you have like skins from the past, and then kids can learn. There's like
Don't give too much
challenges.
away. Don't give
That's next up.
Ibram, young people are going to read this book, and some of them may feel deflated. They may go like, man, racism was so bad back then, so bad during slavery, so bad during Jim Crow, segregation, etc. And it feels like it's so bad today. How can I maintain hope in this world? You know, whether as a black kid or whether as a kid who's not black and going like, I'm an ally, I want this world to be a better place.
So that's why we didn't just want to write a history about racism. We wanted to write a history about anti-racism. We wanted to show them how people have been fighting against anti-racism from its origins. And people are fighting against it today, and they can be a part of that fight. And here is essentially how people have done it in the past, here how they've been effective, and here's how you can be effective today.
When you look through the stories, when you dig into the history of racism, does it have, the way we understand racism today, does it have a definitive start date? Is there a moment in time, or is it just an evolution of people hating each other because they're not the same?
So there is a start date, the transatlantic slave trade. You know, that's when you had all these different ethnic groups in Africa that were imagined as one people, one inferior people that was worthy of enslavement. And then simultaneously, the racist policies that undergirded the transatlantic slave trade. And we talk about these original racists in the text. And young people are like, whoa, there was the original first racist I had
Right.
never knew. And, you know, that's one of the fascinating things I think about this text.
One thing you do really well in the book, in my opinion, is you break it down so that people can see what is oftentimes underlying racism or racism that some people may not even realize that they have been indoctrinated into. You know, you talk about the Southern strategy. You talk about how Nixon and many Republicans realized that they couldn't just say these things. They couldn't call black people the N-word outwardly. They had to say ghettos, and they had to say thugs, and there was the code words and language that was used. When breaking that down for kids, do you think that'll help them understand some of those implications that are still in place today?
I do. I do think that breaking it down will help them sort of grapple with it and understand. But I also think that we can create new code, right? And so what I'm saying is that this book, the intention of this book is to create new code, right? Anti-racist is a new code, right? For a person who's really fighting for true equity,
Right.
for true love. Right, and I think that's our real task. People talk about indoctrination all the time. This idea that like, oh, I don't want this book in my classroom because it's indoctrination. Well, isn't everything? So what if we were able to create new indoctrination for equity and justice?
Wow, that's powerful. I loved it. I've never read about history like this. I've never read about the now like this, and it really breaks racism down into a beautiful way that I think kids of all races will enjoy. Thank you so much for being on the show. I hope everybody reads it. It should be in every school. I'll tell you that much. Thank you so much for being on the show. Stamp is available now. You really want to go out and get it. Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kendi, everybody.
So has anyone seen that before? I thought that was a really compelling overview about the book and kind of an intro to the character and personality of the authors, which to me really comes across in that audiobook, which is partly why I keep saying, you might really like to listen to this. But do you feel like maybe we should include this little clip in at least the first of each of our sessions? Because to me, it's like 5 minutes. It's really plants the whole picture right there. What do you think? I'm seeing some nodding heads. Barbara?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
George, looks like you, yeah. Hey.
I'm not sure. And you said at each of our sessions, I certainly think it should be included, but I think I'd get a little tired of it after the second or third time.
I was wondering if people are going to come to each of or if there'll be one-offs. We don't really know what to expect. That's why we were thinking if we created themes like, okay, the first one will look at the first section, we'll divide it into the 4 sections. Then we probably wouldn't. But if we notice that by say the 3rd time we're getting people who've never come before, we could drop this in and start the conversation with it.
We can also make it really prominent on the front page of our website and in emails that it's so maybe for the first session, and then if we feel like we're getting people who might not have participated, we could drop it in as needed. Sort of like a prescription. Use as needed.
Rita.
I was going to say, if you're sending out like emails and you put it in each email that you send to people, they can watch it or not. And it's a good reminder, and having it on our website, on the Senior Center website, I think would be awesome, just so people can refer to it. Because I know sometimes you think, oh, I might get tired of hearing this, but I think that it's such a refreshing message that I wouldn't mind hearing it every time we start a session. That's just me.
Or maybe we do one in January and do it in February or whatever, once a month or something. To me, it's such a, it's just sort of a wonderful, juicy, lively, engaging little opportunity to kind of hear those voices and see those faces that make it really make me want to talk more about it. I don't know. Kimmy. Kimmy, you're muted.
Or your microphone is in the wrong place. Like, do you have a microphone attached to your headphones or something?
No, I was in a meeting. You still can't hear?
We can now.
Okay, I just put the volume up, but I don't know why that was. But you can hear?
Yes.
Yeah, there's some
Okay.
interference.
Oh, that's weird. Okay. I was in a meeting for 90 minutes this morning and it went well, so I don't know what the problem is here. I was just going to say, with my past position and everything, I'm going to want to return to the book. But because there's 5 sections, and this is just a suggestion, obviously, I don't know how many are planned, how many sessions are planned. But because the book itself is loaded with so many wonderful facts that have meaning for the present, and that is the common element that we all have control of, because we will have read it, or we will be in possession of it, or will have heard it. I was wondering if at least 5 sessions, or maybe we could choose, just go in chronological order. And then, because I found the questions from the living room conversations really helpful, so we could all maybe come prepared to say what we were surprised in this section by, and I wish whatever, that those sentence stems are excellent. I still have questions about, and they're so broad. My takeaway from tonight in this section is, because what I did after reading the book is then I ordered 2 more books that I thought were going to really enhance my my deeper understanding, and people can share, well, what they're planning to do. Go back to, Langston Hughes poems, or, learn about the Harlem Renaissance, or, just draw the line in our history and how it's connected, but have as a base the information that we all share in these sections. But that's my, and then go away with why my next step is, I like to hear what other people are going to do with this information, because the last chapter, of course, he is saying you are one of three people. You're either anti-racist, you're assimilationist, or you're a racist. So find yourself in one of those camps and try to understand what that means. And then if we're all moving, and I think we all want to be anti-racist, where are we, and where are you personally, you think you are, and what can you gain from this discussion of these wonderful people here that want to share the same kind of movement forward? That's just my idea.
No, that's great. We had planned out January and February because of the newsletter, and now we're working on March, April. We didn't know how much interest there would be or how long people might want to continue it, but we could certainly keep going. And I feel like each section could be 20 meetings, really, if we really wanted to take it down to the bone. But I'm not sure that we would have that much have that sustained an interest, but we can certainly do more. And that's on the table for sure. I wondered about if we do 5 sections and then have one that's kind of more on now what, and where would we like to go? And the last one could be that sort of community talking about next steps for us all, and what you'd like to see happening at the senior center, for instance, like more kinds of programming, more opportunities to have real conversations, etc. Does that sound?
Mm-hmm.
George?
One of my reactions when I read it was, well, they never taught me that. They never taught me that. They never taught me that. And then I got to the 50s, 60s, and 70s when I thought I was paying attention. And there were so many things that I was not aware of because of who was telling the story. So I think, to me, that's an avenue that comes back again and again. Who's telling the story and who got listened to? What got written down?
Yeah, exactly. All history is from some point of view, right? I mean, and a lot of, when I was growing up, history was mostly about war.
Mm-hmm. Presidents.
Yeah, dates and wars, and
dead white man.
Pretty much. Yeah, exactly. Well, and I grew up in Concord, Massachusetts, so we had all the wonderful native people who gave us all their food and didn't mind being shipped to England as like zoo animals because they thought it was fun or whatever. I mean, we got the fairy tales wherever we lived, but we didn't get the history. So I think this could open some doors to, there's a wonderful book about American history from the viewpoint of Indigenous people that Rita and I talked about doing a book series on, and maybe that's another one that we could follow up with, because there's so many doors and windows to open.
Yes, in that conversation we had last Monday with the school board members, one of the things that was discussed was Washington State history. And I grew up in Washington State, and boy, I mean, talk about what George was talking about. What I learned about was, the governors and the territory and when we became a state and who were the prominent businessmen, and completely, talk about monochrome.
Well, I remember Barbara Lawrence telling the story of how she was on that first governor's commission to talk about the canoe journey and bring those.
Yeah, it was for the centennial, I think, the state.
Centennial, and they were going to have the reenactment of who was it that came in? Was it Wilkes expedition coming through? And they were saying, "What do you think of that?" And Barbara said, "It wasn't our best day." Right? Like, no. And then asking her if she could represent all tribes and all women at the table, right? It's like there's a lot that doesn't get told in so many histories. Barbara,
one thing from Barbara Lawrence's that talk that's really stuck with me is here she'd been asked to help organize this, 100-year celebration of all the things that white people had done in the state. And she thought, we have baskets that are older than that. And I just thought that was really perfect. It's like,
Right. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of places we can continue if there's really the appetite for it, which I hope there is. And again, we want to make it what you want. So it's not top down, but it's really coming from the members, coming from the community. And I'm hearing like, well, real conversations are much more rewarding. But maybe we start with some of the roundtable questions and then pick the questions that seem liveliest and say, let's talk about this one together. Because that gives each group the autonomy to decide what's the juiciest piece for them to follow up with. Does that sound good? Peggy, do you want to say anything about that, or?
No, I like that idea a lot. I think when people engage in the conversation, that's when people get the most out of it. So, but I like the idea of kind of looking at the salient points of a certain chapter or section first, and then diving deeper into people's personal reactions and things like that.
Yeah, and making sure that it is a safe space. I think that piece is important too. That's something I'm concerned about. That's why I talk about the no shame, no blame idea that, you can ask anything. But I think it's really important that we set up some kind of parameters that, what you hear here stays here, like as we would in any group, that if people are really being vulnerable and exposing their ideas and concerns or whatever, then we need to respect that and make sure that everybody feels like they're honored in that way, if that makes sense, I hope. Yep.
How did they say it at the library? What we learn here leaves the room?
No.
What you hear
is
here
what we
stays
hear
here.
stays.
Yeah,
And
what you
then
hear
What we hear here stays here.
What you
what we
learn
learn,
here
you
leaves
take
here.
with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you learn here leaves here. Like, take with you or whatever. Kimi?
Well, they also started with how we'll engage. And so just very quickly, we could all be reminded of the, like 5 points that you're always, engaging with good intent and expecting others are also doing the same. And, it's listed for us in the living room conversations.
Yeah. I felt like I liked the many pieces of that format, but it did not allow conversation. And I noticed almost all the groups sort of hung around a little bit after, like everybody wanted to continue it. And yet there wasn't really space for that. But I feel like that's something we would like to try to create, is having some structure and some freedom of conversation to really explore these ideas together.
I'd like to know what they're going to do with all those pieces of paper that they put up on the wall, because that's the meat of it. And I just think that begs a new getting together.
Well, I can ask. Like, what happens to all those pieces of paper? But if we do the same kind of thing, which we certainly could, we can use what comes out of it at the last, when we have a recap meeting at sort of the end of the series, we can say, here's what has come out in terms of those kind of responses, and talk about that together again, rather than, maybe we could do a little report, I suppose, but I think, again, that's more of a conversation piece, or I hope it would be a conversation piece.
I find it really fascinating for myself personally, having grown up, being in school in the late 40s and the early 50s in high school, that I know nothing, absolutely nothing. And as I have read Coates, and as I have read this marvelous book Stamped, and few other books as well, Baldwin, et cetera, I still am there is so much out there that I know nothing about. I want to know, and that's why I am thrilled that we're doing this, Anne. I'm thrilled we're doing it, because just as a purely selfish reason, I want to know. I want to know.
Well, I feel the same way, Sheila, and I'm really glad you said that. I think a lot of us do want to know and are eager to learn more. And that's something, and again, we're asking you here in this session to kind of help us figure out what it is you're interested in, how you'd like to proceed, what would be most rewarding. And honestly, I'm interested in what would be least rewarding too. Like, are there things about certain kinds of book club structures that you really don't like and hope we don't do? If that's true, then bring that forward too, please, right?
Delight?
Delight,
Delight, did you have something to say? I'm sorry.
yeah, she's muted.
I thought last Monday was good in many ways, but as we all have said, it was not a conversation. I think part of the problem was they had 3 very meaty questions that we're supposed to speak to. And I think that took up all the time. So I guess what I'm suggesting is have one question, have everybody in a small group in a breakout room, if it's Zoom, speak quickly to that question and then throw it open to a conversation. So people do have a chance to share and, participate back and forth.
Does anyone feel that each of those small groups would need to have a facilitator?
No.
No, I think if the question is raised, one of the issues with a group breaking up into groups, well, a couple of issues. One, I don't think it will be as easy to preserve this so that there won't be, unless there's a part of the meeting that is done like this, it won't be easy for people to participate after the fact, which is what we do with a lot of our Zoom meetings. But if there was a part of it that's a breakout and a part of it that's together, I'm happy to, kind of cut out the part that doesn't exist and put it on the line. And then the other thing is a recognition that if we're in small groups, we should probably keep the time relatively tight so that we avoid the idea, if it happens, of somebody who wants to monopolize or lecture. And I guess the other part of that would be an understanding that that if the facilitator says, okay, thank you, you need to take a break now and let somebody else talk, that the Wizard of Oz role, which I'm performing, can mute you.
And then if we come back the way I think Delight, or I can't remember now who suggested, that you come back after the breakout groups and each person presents a little bit of, or somebody presents for each group a bit of what was discovered, that could be tacked on to the end. We'd obviously cut out, nobody has to sit through the 15 minutes or whatever that were away, right?
But I have never done that recording, so I don't know how it would end up exactly. That will be kind of an experiment. And I also have, we have had very rare situations in this conversation of something to talk about where anybody has done that monopolizing. I think it's sort of the fear that probably led to the living room conversations schedule, because not knowing who would show up, I went through a red blue conversation in the height of 2016, 2017, where that was very structured to try to avoid going into the sort of pre-programmed rabbit holes that we had all been given about, Republican, Democrat points of view. And so for the right kind of conversation, that kind of structured conversation can be very useful.
Well, even at the event, we had 3 members of FAIR participate. And I think one of the important reasons behind the structure is to avoid arguments, and also to avoid, like, by not having a facilitator, some ideas are never challenged or never brought up as maybe that's not really, maybe that's a racist point of view, I mean, not in those words, but yeah, so I just wanted to add that into.
Peggy, can you say a couple sentences about what FAIR is?
Oh, FAIR is, let's see, what's the acronym? It's a national organization. It's a Republican strategy to put fear into parents around what their children are being taught in schools. It is the kind of push behind the anti-critical race theory. And so we have a local chapter of FAIR here, and someone on the island chairs it, and it's Kitsap County wide, and they are going to school district meetings board meetings and pushing back against the teaching of true history and things like that. So we have that presence in our community.
Right. And I don't know that everyone realizes that. Because if if you don't have kids of school age, or you don't tend to go to school board meetings on a regular basis, you may not be aware that that's been a movement for the last couple of years.
And many of the people involved in that movement don't have kids that go to those schools.
Correct. Don't even live on the island necessarily.
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
But there was a editorial in the Bainbridge Review a couple months ago, that kind of took that angle and was written by a fair member. And it was more about the anti-affordable housing thing, but it's the same paradigm.
Yes, it is. And you wrote a very reasonable, wonderful letter to rebut another op-ed or letter about why the city doesn't need any racial training or justice training or equity training, because that just politicizes the issue. And it's like, oh, like they're not already politicized? Oh, excuse me. But I thought that you did a brilliant job. And if any of you missed it, you could look it up online, Bainbridge Review, Peggy Erickson, September 22 or November 22, you'll find it. And it's very good. And I think that that's a beautiful lesson too. It's like there are ways to rebut, there are ways to turn something out of an argument into a conversation. That's a real skill. And that's something Kuye, who's not with us right this minute again, she's brilliant at. And we're going to talk about that a little bit with her on Wednesday, right, Reed? About truth and reconciliation. And part of that movement is turning arguments into conversations, learning to use our deep listening to really kind of find what's underlying sometimes the contentious or argumentative or really challenging positions, and meet those arguments with, as Karen says, grace and compassion, rather than with, I don't know about you, but sometimes I get really mad, and that is not my best conversational approach. All right. So trying to hold that together and come to, I guess I would say, like really deeper, more compassionate connection with somebody who we disagree with passionately. I think that's a really valuable skill. And again, that's gonna we're gonna talk about that with Akuye and Debbie Hazy on Wednesday of this week at this time, 11:30. If that's a skill set you're interested in, please check in with us. I want to ask you right now if I missed anything, if there are things I didn't talk about that you wanted to bring out, if there's points that you'd like raised, or if there's, Rita, I see your hand. No, George.
Oh, just quickly that there's also a wonderful long article in the New Yorker within the last 6 weeks about the movement and all the controversies in schools. And one thing I think we can bring is we have nothing to be defensive about. We can be open, and horrible things have happened. Horrible things are still happening. I can't change the past, but I can learn from it and apply and be more acutely aware of my naivete on lots of these examples, so that I don't need to necessarily change anybody's opinion in this group. I can listen to them and see what I might learn, even if I disagree with it. But we don't need to be defensive and accusatory. We just need to figure out how each of us can do a better job in our daily life.
Exactly. I love that. Thank you, George. And I'm really grateful that you're somebody who works closely with children. George is a librarian at Island School. I don't know if you all know that, and the author of a number of children's books. Beautiful, inclusive children.
This is Akuye. I kind of, got in a dead spot, but I'm able to get back on. And what has been said is so wonderful. When we're talking about our young people, I think we have a tremendous opportunity
to shift the paradigm for their future moving forward with how we engage in this work. And so I'm so excited. I'm very excited on the direction that we are moving to really have some transformational change to some harmful history. And that to me is very hopeful. It's very inspiring. And so I'm just grateful. I'm very grateful. And really proud of the work that our community is doing to engage in these conversations and engage in the work for change. Engage in that work for change. And I don't know what to say. My heart is full, and I just wanted to say that to Ann and to Reed and for all of our community members that are just doing this work so wonderfully. It's, it's been a labor of love for many years, and to finally see fruit of the work. I'll stop there.
I like it when you go on. But thank you so much, Akuye. Yeah, we are, I think I just remember talking to you years ago and saying, we need to talk about this stuff. And you saying, yeah, we do. And then we started talking, and sure enough, it's so rich, isn't it? And I think I love both what George said, that, we don't need to be defensive. We can be open and willing to listen and hear and not feel like we're walking into, a landscape strewn with landmines, but instead we're all exploring together, and we're, entering it with goodwill and good intention, and setting that intention up front, as Kimi said, making sure we make it clear what the intentions are going in, how we're going to hold these conversations. I think all those pieces are really valuable.